Okay, so we're going to look at an IELTS Task 1 essay, and it's everyone's favorite. It's the bar chart. Yay! Everyone loves a good IELTS Task 1 bar chart. Let's take a look at what it's about. The chart below shows information about changes in average house prices in 5 different cities between 1990 and 2002, compared with the average house price in 1989. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Okay, so we've got the 5 cities: New York, Madrid, Tokyo, Frankfurt, London. Okay, and then we've got how much did it change compared to 1989. Okay, so this graph is a little bit more complicated to understand. It's not as simple as some of the others. So don't be afraid in the IELTS test to take a minute or 2 minutes to look carefully at the graph to make sure you're correctly understanding what the graph is showing you. Okay, so it's whether the average house price decreased compared to 1989 or whether it increased compared to 1989. Okay, so we've got 1990 to 95, and then we've got 1996 to 2002. So it's a 5-year period, and then we've got a 6-year period. Okay, so let's take a look and see just generally what are sort of the main differences that we can see. Okay, so the biggest one that changes that I can see that I would want to talk about seems to be, this would be London here. Okay, so here we've got a decrease and then it has a huge change. Okay, so one thing I'm thinking of is I'm thinking that I want to talk a lot about London and it's a change. Okay, the other one that changes is New York, because New York is the same. It goes down and then it goes up. Okay, so that's the similar change. So I probably want to do London and New York together as an overall decrease, then increase. Okay, so I'm thinking, okay, that's going to be my body one. That's the first change, okay? London and New York both were lower than 1989, and then they had a huge increase compared to 1989, okay? And then looking at the other 3 cities stayed the same, okay? So Madrid, Tokyo, and Frankfurt all sort of stayed the same, but got more, or apart from Frankfurt. Okay, so Madrid stayed the same but got more. Tokyo stayed the same but got less. And then Frankfurt stayed the same but got less. Okay, so then in body 2, I probably want to talk about Madrid, Tokyo, and Frankfurt. So still, similar but different, small changes. Okay, but I guess in Madrid, house prices got more expensive. In Tokyo, they got more expensive. I guess Frankfurt is the only place where house prices got cheaper. Okay, so maybe that would be what I want to highlight. Frankfurt, cheaper. And I hope I'm reading this graph right. I'm not a maths person. I hate maths. I'm assuming as it gets negative, it means the house is becoming cheaper. And then plus means the house is getting more expensive. I don't know. I don't own a house. Okay. So once you've looked through the graph, once you've thought about stuff like, okay, what tense am I talking about? This is all going to be past. So it's going to be past tense. And then you've sort of decided roughly what your main trends are and how you're going to divide up the information. Okay, so let's look and see what this candidate's done. So between 1990 to 1995, the average change in accommodation was relatively low. It's not a change in accommodation. What's it a change in? It's a change in average house price. So you would say accommodation cost, change in, housing prices. You could say, if you want to paraphrase a little bit, was relatively low. Especially for Tokyo and London. You only say London area, just say particular, especially for Tokyo and London, the percentage of the change was below -5, while Madrid and Frankfurt was more than 0. All the house prices continue to grow except for Germany. Okay. I think this is correct. I don't know if this is correct. Was below 5%, was the change in price was relatively low. Because I feel like London had a big change, right? Did London not have the biggest change? Unless they're confusing this one as London. I'm not sure that's correct. But I mean, the sentence is okay, but I'm not sure the actual information is correct. The biggest change from 1990 to 1995. Okay, so I would say rather than this, if I read this out, this is really hard to read. Listen to me read this sentence. The biggest change from 1990 to 1995 to 1996 to 2002 was in London. That's a hard for me to read. So I would say the biggest change in the two, maybe just say 5-year periods, even though technically it's 6 years, or the biggest change, maybe say across the 12 years, or something like that. It's much easier to read than having all of these numbers. While it was the least changed housing, but then here you just said London, the percentage change was less than 5%. It was relatively low. But then it was, London became the most expensive area. Oh, were they trying to, okay, so they're focusing on just this one period. Oh, the house change was relatively low. But then again, London's not the lowest change. The lowest change is Madrid. Madrid is the lowest change in this period. Okay, so now they've kind of decided to... I'm guessing that what they're doing is they're trying to do the first period and then they're comparing to the second period. But I would just say, okay, this structure is confusing. Just divide in terms of... Either divide in terms of time or divide in terms of city. So I decided I was going to divide in terms of city. Or you do the first period and then you do the second period. So structure is a little bit confusing to me. While it was the least changed housing price region in 1990 to 1995, so in the first period, in 1962, London became the most expensive area of the 5 main cities in the world. I don't think we say the 5 main cities. I just say of the 5 main cities, or the 5 cities listed, the 5 cities shown. The next city which showed enough difference between the same period was New York. Showed enough difference in the same period. What does enough difference mean? More difference, a change, a big difference, a small difference? I'm not sure. It was also one of the minus zone cities to average 5% city. This doesn't make sense. One of the minus zone cities to average 5% city, which shows great difference as much as London in the graph. Okay, this should be joined. Okay, I'm the phrasing and the sentence structure here is confusing for me to read, and it's difficult for me to understand what this candidate is trying to say. And I think you can hear that as I'm reading it, that it feels quite confusing for me to read. The least changed price area was Frankfurt, Germany. The percentage was slightly dropped. The percentage slightly decreased over time, but still remained equivalent. In fact, the price in Frankfurt showed a decrease, while other cities tended to increase their housing price. Okay, so, I mean, to be fair to this candidate, that's a very difficult chart to talk about. It's not a very straightforward chart, and the information is being presented in a very confusing way. So I totally sympathize that you might have looked at that graph and thought, I actually don't know what this is trying to show me. But I think they've not gone about describing the graph in the most simple way. And a lot of the time, these things can be fixed by just taking a little bit of time at the start, before you start writing, just to do a little bit of planning and thinking about what you're going to say. So, I mean, task achievement, they have picked out some features and they have tried to describe them, but not super clearly. So that score's going to be lower. And the coherence was bad. It was very confusing to read. Okay, it didn't feel like they'd planned out what they were going to write about in each section. Okay, so you can fix that by having clear topic sentences, okay, which tell me what you're going to write about in that paragraph. Okay, first, there were only 2 cities that went from negative percentage change to positive percentage change, and then you sort of, tell me about that. Vocabulary, again, yes, they did try to use good vocabulary, but again, confusing. And the grammar was also pretty confusing as well. So to be honest, they're coming out at a 4.5, not because their English was really bad, but just because the way they were writing was confusing and it didn't feel like they planned out their answer, super well. So task 1, it's always the same: paraphrase, overview, detail 1, detail 2, okay? And in your overview, you should tell me what are the 2 topics that you're going to look at. Okay, so it's very fixable. I think if they had a much clearer structure, a much clearer idea of where they were going, it would be better.